Prior of the era of claymation with Wallace and Gromit, in the realm of animation, Britain was best well known for its traditional animated feature films centering on the subject of animal rights. There were 3 well-known titles: Animal Farm, Watership Down, and Plague Dogs. They're all based off books, and compared to the animated flicks in America, the British films weren't too filtered. In fact, you could say that sometimes they could be a little bit unhinged. While only 2 of them were made by the same production group, I always like lining them up as a trilogy, as they do share a fair bit between each other. In fact, they fall right into the category of xenofiction, a genre where the stories are from the perspective of non-humans. So in this program, we're going to do a little retrospective, looking at each film individually, from their development to all the way up to their legacy. So sit back and relax for the true vintage British experience, as we'll be taking a look at the British xenofiction trilogy. John Hatchler was a Hungarian animator who took on board the British artist Joy Batchelor to come and aid him with his animation films. They both didn't speak a shared language, but they developed a romantic bond by their love of drawing. Shortly after Hitler's invasion of Vienna, the couple's funding was cut, and they were forced to flee back to London. John had very little English at the time, so in the early days, Joy had to do a lot of the legwork in order to find commission jobs. It was a 50-50 partnership between both couples, which was virtually unheard of with any women for the animation industry back in the 1930s. In fact, unlike a lot of the American studios of the time, Haller and Batchelor had many main female animators that weren't just confined to the ink and paint process. Being an immigrant in the fear that John Hallis might have either been exported or sent away to a camp, the couple wed during World War II. After the war, the couple made several public information films for the government, featuring the cartoon character Charlie the Everyman.
When you're ill, you won't have to pay for treatment.
I don't have to pay the doctor now. I'm on the panel.
Yes, that's true, but your wife and children aren't. The panel system covers only half the population, and it doesn't cover hospital treatment or a lot of other things, does it?
Would you have found it possible to make those films if their policy hadn't been yours? If you disagreed with them?
I don't think that neither Joy Batchelor or I am political animals.
Come the 50s, the couple had stumbled upon a new stepladder in their career, directing Britain's first fully animated feature, that being the George Orwell book Animal Farm. The couple were approached about the project from American producer Louis de Rochemore, well known for his newsreels and documentaries, although was completely unfamiliar with the medium of animation, hence the involvement of Joy and John.
But I still remember very vividly the moment when we were asked to make it. Orwell is a hero of mine, and John's.
The press was already advertising them as being the British answer to Walt Disney. It was a prestigious opportunity. However, for those who are unfamiliar with the original Animal Farm book, it was a pseudo-fantasy retelling of the Russian Revolution of 1917, which, for those of you who know your history, was the rise of communism in the country. And producer Louis de Rochemore was very anti-communism. And it's recently come to light that one of the potential parties that funded Animal Farm was the American CIA, which it wasn't uncommon for the division to fund feature films, and later use them as promotion for propaganda.
Although we didn't realise at the time, we just thought it was a story about a farm.
But to be fair, de Rochemore and Joy and John were probably unaware of the CIA's involvement. As far as the directors Joy and John were concerned, they were just telling a story about animals being self-aware of their own strength, and utilising that to their advantage. After all, they weren't the type of couple that were
political animals.
Tremendous relief and change after years and years of making documentary films to have a real story and a long film instead of interminable little shorts. John and I were working terribly well together. Everybody in the unit, and it was a big unit by the time we'd finished.
The biggest reason why the CIA chose Haller and Batchelor to make the movie was because of their prior political works, And also, it would be cheaper to outsource the movie from another country. Well, that's just good old-fashioned American capitalism. For the first 2 years, the team that were working on the movie were a relatively small unit, working out the kinks to readapt the book to the silver screen. By the time that they had the stories and shots laid out, they began bringing on additional animators that could handle the workload that's required for an animated feature. The director of animation, John Reed, had actually came from over the pond, previously working for Disney. But compared to the movies that Uncle Walt was producing at the same time, the movie is very unhinged. There are many long drawn-out moments that have an unsettling atmosphere. Domestic abuse, violent battle scenes, malicious suicide, backstabbing, coldless murders, and not shying away from showing dead animal bodies. So could you believe that one of the biggest critiques from critics at the time that it was too Disneyfied? While today the movie is largely remembered as a dark European cartoon, there are light-hearted elements that can be found in the feature, such as that slice of dry British humour, like how the narrator just briefly breaks character.
What was that? No. No, it wasn't Mr. Jones.
And the sort of gags that you would see in an American cartoon. The light comedic moments are often followed up by a lot of the darker elements, so it would be misleading to say that the film is one-sided in tone. It's just, as a film made in Europe, it's a little less filtered than what you would have seen in Hollywood. But to be fair, perhaps another reason why critics called it over Disneyfied is on how it somewhat simplifies the story. Cutting off the end credits, the movie is only about 58 minutes long. Key plot points are brought much earlier into the narrative, compressing the plot down to fit within a shorter runtime. A lot of characters, even named characters, never made it into the final film, and quite a lot of the animal characters don't even have any speaking lines, which instantly removes a lot of the intellect from the book. Instead, the film is largely a visual story. Much of the exposition is covered by the narrator, Gordon Heath, who uses a newsreel voice for the film, giving the film a documentary vibe, although his very BBC voice does make him sound quite contemporary for a modern day audience.
On this night, all the animals had agreed that as soon as Mr. Jones was in bed, they would gather in the main barn for a secret meeting, called by Old Major, the prize boar hog, who because of his years was regarded as by far the wisest of the animals.
Aside from the narrator, there was only one voice actor in the film, that being character actor Maurice Denham, who did all the voices of the animals and the farmers. Initially, the animals weren't going to have any audible dialogue, and that the film would have been entirely subtitled, but as a way to give the film a bit of a broader appeal to a Western audience, it was decided to give the animal characters partial verbal English. But after that initial cut of the animals only partially speaking proved to be disastrous, it was re-recorded yet again, this time having the animals fully speak in English. At this stage, the animation was fully complete, and Denham's dialogue had to fit exactly to the lip movements. Audiences at the time noticed that the senior pig major had a very uncanny voice not too dissimilar to Winston Churchill.
I have had much time for thought as I lay alone in my stall.
Saying I was doing an imitation of Winston Churchill, which had never occurred to me at all. There was terrific correspondence about whether it should be allowed to be done like that. Come on, let's keep it in. You know, he may enjoy it. I don't know what his reaction was.
I am afraid so, and he wasn't very pleased about it either.
For a little bit of context, Major was a combination of Mark and Lennon, which, to put it nicely, they weren't the same intellectuals like Churchill.
In fact, he sent down a message of displeasure.
What did he say?
That we should have asked his permission to try to portray him in this game. But we have to ignore.
But even so, the creative liberties that the filmmakers took weren't all to make the film slightly less bleak. For example, in the book, the pig Snowball is only merely just exiled from Animal Farm, with huge indications that he could maybe one day come back. But in the movie, there isn't any optimism that he will be returning. This was a byproduct by the CIA, who heavily request Snowball to be far less empathetic. It would be unfair to say that the book Animal Farm truly looks at communism black and white. But of course, as a production by the CIA, they were going to heavily simplify the message. In the book, the story ends with the pigs firmly in power, being just as bad as the prior dictator, Mr. Jones. With no hope of the tyranny ever ending, producer Louis de Rochemore pledged for a more happy ending. This was at the conflict of John Hallis's vision.
The discussion never got rowdy, and both sides were very polite. And I would say Louis won, though.
The ending was compromised to suit both visions. On one hand, it leaves a hopeful outcome for the future, but then on the other, the suggestion of perpetual revolution. It was optimistic, but certainly no Hollywood happy ending.
At the end of this film, projected the possibility of the eternal cycle to repeat itself, that is, the revolution to happen again. And we implied that this whole condition might repeat itself stronger than it has been implied in the book itself. I would defend, and I am sure Joy Batchelor as well, this end in the film, which is a positive media. You cannot send home millions of audiences being puzzled. You've got to be a little bit more positive and show the future.
The film was overall a success. It was a peak in the career of Haller and Batchelor. Animal Farm is still their best well-known work to this day. They had many other feature films planned, but unfortunately the success of Animal Farm never quite spilled over for Haller and Batchelor to produce their pet projects. But come over a decade later, in 1967, they were able to create one more feature film, being an opera adaptation of Radagast, often praised as the very first animated opera to be extended as a feature film. Unfortunately, due to the film being under a shared and strict copyright, the movies had very limited exposure over the years, only finally receiving a DVD release in 2005, being packaged with Tales from Hoffnum.
In my power at last, eh?
We are prepared for this. And while this glorious rag floats over Rose Maybud's head, the man does not live who would dare to lay unlicensed hand upon her.
Their studio even supplied some of the animation for 1981's Heavy Metal. In 1999, the movie was remade as a live-action TV movie. It brought in many aspects from the book that didn't make it in the '54 film, so while it's arguably a slightly closer adaptation to the book, this version yet again deviates from the ending. It's a much more happier and hopeful finale when compared to the '54 movie. For several years now, there have been ongoing talks of remaking Animal Farm once again, with Andy Serkis currently attached to direct the film and as well voice the character of Benjamin. We still haven't had an official confirmation of when the movie's due to come out, so we'll have to wait and see on this one. Hallis and Batchelor made dozens and dozens of short films, using a wide variety of animation techniques, often dealing with different genres, either a light-hearted music video or politically charged. The pair often utilised the latest in technology, such as producing the Owl and Pussycat cartoon as a film that utilises 3D glasses, and even taking advantage of making cartoons on the computer as early as the late 60s. If you're a lover of vintage British animation, I would highly recommend seeking out the Haller and Batchelor short film collection. It highlights 18 of their titles and is loaded with extra features. Animal Farm may have not made them the powerhouse like Disney, but it certainly did lay down the foundations for the type of animated feature films to be produced in Britain for the next 28 years. Come the mid-1970s, Joy Batchelor had to retire from animation due to developing arthritis. One of the final works that the couple did was illustrating a cover reprint of Animal Farm, using a similar art style to their film adaptation. Joy sadly passed away at home shortly before John arrived with the new cover, as him and his daughter were waiting for the ambulance to arrive. John got out the book and remarked on how Joy was a better drawer than him.
It won't take any notice of us at all. I'll show you. Watch this. See? It's not interested.
In the summer of 1966, Richard Adams told his two daughters a particularly long story about two rabbit brothers named Fievel and Hazel. He would often put the story on pause and would resume the tale at another time. Eventually, his daughters pledged to him to write it all as a novel. He completed his first draft in November of '67, but it didn't see publication not until 5 years later. Sharing and tweaking it with his family, the story became Watership Down. It was an unfiltered look at life from the perspective of rabbits. As a group of 9 try and find a new home and start a new colony, Adams often cites one of the most profound moments of his inspiration of making the book was all the way back when he was a small child, where he was greatly fond of the stories of Peter Rabbit. But then at the age of 5, he was utterly distraught when he saw a rabbit being skinned. A realization of what real rabbits are like. Adams drew many key events from his own life to write the book, such as the death of his friends during World War II and the passing of his father.
Well, I had a very, very strong feeling that things could never be the same again. The truth is that you and I are here, we don't know where we've come from, we don't know where we're going. We dream up for ourselves a sense of security, but we're not really secure. I mean, awful things can happen in a minute. Walter Le Maire's poetry played fair.
But the book isn't completely heartless, as the rabbits will occasionally tell tales of their mythical hero, the original Prince of Rabbits, Ella Frera. Adams interspersedly spread the stories into the book to give the readers a relief from the plot. For several years, the book was a very hard sell. It had the skin of a children's novel with talking rabbits, but the material was very heavy. Overall, the book can be universally enjoyed, but it's definitely not everyone's cup of tea. Producer Martin Rosen first read the book of Watership Down while he was on location in India. He was extremely gravitated towards the story. When he got back to Britain, he arranged to acquire the rights. Early on, he was potentially thinking of doing the movie via the method of puppetry, but ultimately decided to go with traditional animation. And in 1975, he founded a new animation studio in London to specifically do work on Watership Down. Veteran animator John Hubley was meant to be the film's original director, but after a year of pre-production, producer Rosen didn't like the direction of the film and wanted something far more closer to the original book. So having a clear vision for the film, Rosen would direct the feature instead, and Hubley left due to creative differences. One of the few aspects that was retained from the Hubley version was the film's opening prologue. It's possible that there might have been even more scenes with Ella Frera, or at the very least in a similar style, as recent online auction listings for the animation cells have several frames that don't appear in the final movie, and furthermore these deleted scenes have never turned up on any home media releases. This would be the final movie Hubley would work on, as he would pass away 1 year prior to the film's release. Watership Down was Rosen's first time directing, and he had never previously worked for the medium of animation, so it was very much a learning experience for him all the way through. What made the production especially difficult was that the whole film was nearly self-financed.
Yeah, Martin really gave me my first break on this, but he was very mean with the money.
It was a huge warehouse they'd hired for us to work in. It was very tacky.
It was cheap.
Cheap, cold, but it was cheerful.
But we're still friends.
We're still friends.
When they acquired on the voice actors, what they did first was record it all as if it was a radio play, and then they brought the actors back later on to show them the rough animation with their voices, and then they would re-record their lines. According to the director Martin Rosen, that by showing the actors the assembly cut, that it gave them a better idea of the dimension on what their characters were like.
John Hurt was walking up the stairs and I recognised him instantly. You know, which floor is Watership Down on? And I said, it's on the top floor, and then he cracked this joke about it being like a rabbit warren. So that was John Hurt.
Yeah, and of
But he
course,
was all right. He was very
the
friendly.
studio was actually in Warren Street.
The filmmakers really favoured into capturing as much realism as possible, such as the rabbits not looking too dissimilar to the real-life species, and capturing much of the foley by going out on location to the English countryside. They even went as far as to purchase real rabbit fur, that they could use it to wrap their hands around when creating the rabbit foot noises. Distribution was extremely difficult to acquire for the movie. The movie was completely self-financed, but the crew were going to need a bigger company in order to properly release and spread the movie. They were able to get a deal from Jim Higgins, who allowed them to premiere it in their cinemas, but they would do so without an advance fee, meaning that the filmmakers had to pay down the money to make the prints, and they wouldn't get any advertisement. But if there was any consolation, Jim Higgins did own some of the most well-known and prestigious theatres in Britain, so if there was a good word of mouth, then it could resuscitate more interest into further distribution. By the end of its theatrical run, the investors who laid down the money to just simply purchase the film rights, which was $50,000, the movie grossed 10 times that amount, as well as an additional $450,000 with interest. The most controversial aspect about the movie in its original home country, that the BBFC gave the movie a U/G rating, classing it universally acceptable for all age groups to view, but the film certainly has quite a heavy bit of violence that you wouldn't see in your typical Disney flick.
What on earth, roots, grass? They ripped my ear.
And as well having an unreserved word.
We help you.
He swears, yes. Well, he's a tough seagull.
The BBFC have received regular complaints every year, rating the film U despite being quite violent. It's become quite the cultural joke in Britain on how Watership Down is not seemingly sentimental.
I think he's gone.
While making this video, I was listening to an interview from Adams' youngest daughter, Rosamund Adams. She spoke about how many people approach her regarding the story to be extremely violent. She feels that it's perhaps become a bit excessive over the years, to describe Watership Down nothing more but as a violent story. She points out that yes, bad things do happen, but bad things are always happening in stories. And technically, in the book, nobody does die. I guess to her defense, coming to the movie, the only deaths we see early on is an imaginative, surreal moment, but technically no real rabbits are seen, so it all happens off screen. And how serious you want to take the prologue. There is a death of a named character called Violet, but that was purely invented for the movie and never happens in the book. Later on, there are some nameless rabbits that do get savaged by a dog, and as well by Woundwort, and we technically never find out what happens to Woundwort. All the main and core characters come out alive, with the exception of Hazel, but he dies of old age. So I think we can let them off on that one. The book was certainly unconventional for its time, but it's the popularity of the movie and its visual representation of the violence that's pushed the idea that Watership Down is a gruesome tale. But the reality is it's so much more than just a kid's story, or even just a mindless bloodbath. In 2022, after 44 years, the movie has finally received a reclassification, now having a PG certificate. The reason why the BBFC didn't give it a PG rating back in 1978 was because the PG rating wasn't introduced into Britain not until 1982. Watership Down still remains to be the most successful traditionally animated film made in Britain, although the original author, Richard Adams, still enjoyed the movie, but was disappointed that the movie didn't include all the aspects from the book. 21 years later in 1999, there was a TV series of the movie that semi-acted as a soft continuation, but it retcons some bits from the original story, so it is as well set within its own universe. It actually brought back the original director, Rosen, as a consultant over the series. Although Richard Adams was fairly separated from this project, it also brings back the voice actors of John Hurt, but now playing General Woundwort, and Richard Pryor as Captain Broom, like I said, acting as a spiritual continuation rather than a direct one. And then in 2018, the BBC and Netflix did a reboot miniseries of the original book, and brought back in many aspects that didn't make it in the first film. And Martin Rosen yet again came back as the producer, although after a lengthy and unfortunate court case with Richard Adams' family, it will likely be Rosen's last involvement with the franchise. I think one of the aspects that makes Watership Down seemingly unsettling to watch is its unfiltered view on how humans can just treat the animal kingdom so carelessly.
They just destroyed the Warren because we were in their way.
But also the story's overall theming, that drastic things beyond our control can happen, and as a result it can dramatically change our lives. But as the rabbits do, we can't just stay in one place. We gotta persevere, keep on moving, find that next horizon of contentment, because if we don't, well, unfortunate things will catch up to us. Just as how the animal kingdom seems so cruel, that one day, death will catch up to all of us. But just like a rabbit, we should run and enjoy the chase while we still can.
The movie had more respect for an audience than the normal cartoons have. I think Watership Down was way ahead of its time in many ways. You didn't have a number of celebrities doing voices, but people used to go to see the movie to get the story. With Watership Down, it was an honest portrayal of the book, and it kept to the book, and that is what I found so exciting about it.
But we'll have to change.
Change? Change to what?
To what we used to be. Real animals. We'll find food. We'll live by our teeth and kill.
Capping things off, we have another movie by Martin Rosen, and as well being adapted from another Richard Adams novel, The Plague Dogs, initially publicised in 1977, and within the span of 5 years a movie adaptation was produced. The production largely used the same crew and animators from Watership Down, even sharing the same actor, John Hurt, who played Hazel on Watership Down, plays Snitter in Plague Dogs.
I'm inside my head now, and it's where I should be.
Many of the key crew members were relocated to San Francisco to get more additional support in America to produce the film. One of the American animators was a very young Brad Bird, who wound up getting fired from Plague Dogs.
I'm a huge admirer of all his work. There's nothing I saw Iron Giant, and I wrote him a effusive letter congratulating him on it. I didn't get a response. Why would I respond to someone that fired me? Clearly extraordinarily talented man in every respect.
Plague Dogs are about 2 lab dogs, Ralph, who's pushing to near-death drowning on a regular basis in the lab, and Snitter, who's had his mind grisly dissected, leading him to have delusional episodes. And unlike Ralph, Snitter was previously a pet dog. Ralph and Snitter are later able to escape from the lab and run into a fox named Todd, who teaches them on how to hunt and scavenge. Snitter longs that one day they'll be able to find a master of their own, but eventually their situation escalates into them being hunted by the humans. Out of the 3 films we've covered, Plague Dogs is the most mature and unsettling of the bunch. The movie, for the most part, stays largely faithful to the original book. There is one big difference, however, and it comes to the end. Without giving too much away, the novel has a hopeful and happy outcome for the dogs, where in the movie, the final outcome of Ralph and Snitter isn't exactly clear to the audience.
And all that, I expect that would have been much more satisfying to an audience. I just felt it just couldn't happen. These dogs were doomed from day one, and the demise was the thing we're leading to, and how that was realized was what I was really going after.
This is the only one of the 3 movies in this video that I never finished watching as a kid. I stopped watching roughly about 40 to 50 minutes in. It comes where Snitter is greeted by a friendly hunter, but as Snitter climbs up to greet the man,
That's it, Walter. Come on, up we go.
yeah, I don't care about what people say about Watership Down, that was just far more traumatizing. He died for no reason, what the hell? Because of how heavy the movie was, the distributors wanted to do cuts to the film to make it far less of an intense experience to watch. The one moment that was deemed to be extremely unpleasant comes where a shooter trying to hunt down the two dogs accidentally falls to his death. The trio proceed to, consume the remains. Embassy Pictures, who distributed the movie in America, removed about 20 minutes of footage. Over the years, there were many different VHS releases of Plague Dogs, widely varying in length, with even the most completed copies of the film were still missing 4 minutes of footage. The full uncut version wouldn't get a release not until 2005, when an unspoiled film print was relocated in Rosen's possession. Despite its numerous edits to appeal to a mass audience, Plague Dogs didn't recoup its budget, making it a financial dud, which was a huge surprise for the crew and extremely disappointing, as after Watership Down there was a lot of high expectation for Plague Dogs.
And it was doing really no business at all over Christmas time. The audience was not prepared for it, whether it's my fault as a creator or as a producer or for whatever reason, it did not attract the kind of audience I thought it might, and then to have it earn some reward back, but for the people that worked on the picture, because not seeing the results of your work is depressing.
Martin Rosen did go on to direct live-action movies, but never made another animated feature, which is rather unfortunate. I often wonder if Plague Dogs was more successful, then would we have gone on for several more years with more unfiltered dark animated features from director Rosen. And hey, maybe it could have been even more adaptations from Adam's books. But as my dad always says, you can't miss what you never had. And what we did get were two unforgettable animated features from Rosen, still unlike any other animated movie of today.
Fighting against everybody to make Watership Down and having that prove to be successful, saying, I can do that again. Well, I couldn't do it again.
If I had to rate all these movies, I would say Watership Down is probably my favourite one. The story is much more fitting for a conventional movie. It's got a much more direct goal for its characters, which for me, it helps it to make it a much more compelling experience to watch. Then I would say Plague Dogs, while it's not an easy film to watch, it feels the most grandest out of the three, and certainly takes far more chances with its plot. I probably won't be watching it again anytime soon, but I'm certainly going to be thinking about it for a long time. And then Animal Farm, it's still a really good film, but it's vintage documentary style, and its short runtime makes it for a rather hollow movie experience. And it feels the most safe out of the three films, as it does balance out its tone with a lot of light elements. But it has helped as I do often revisit Animal Farm. Plague Dogs wasn't the end of British hand-drawn novel adaptations of animals, as the realm of television provided many more series and specials that weren't too dissimilar to theatrical efforts like Watership Down and Animal Farm. Nowadays, cinema releases of animated features produced in Britain mainly comprises of the Aardman flicks, which if you ask me, I don't think the claymation makes them any less disturbing.
Oh!